Story 1. The longest 30 minutes. It was supposed to be a quick errand. I'd taken my lunch break to deposit a check at my local bank, just like I'd done dozens of times before. It was a quiet, sleepy bank on the edge of town. Nothing ever happened there, which was part of the reason I liked it. I'd planned to be in and out in 5 minutes. When I walked in, it was business as usual. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered in the air. The hum of the AC barely audible over the quiet conversations of a few customers. There were only a handful of people inside. An older couple at the teller's window, a woman filling out a deposit slip at the counter, and a man in a suit arguing with a clerk about some paperwork. I stepped up to the line, waiting my turn. It was one of those moments where you zone out, not really paying attention to anything. And that's why I almost didn't notice him at first. The man who walked in next. He was average-looking, tall, wearing a black hoodie and jeans. I wouldn't have given him a second glance if not for the way he moved. He was calm, too calm, like someone who had rehearsed exactly what they were going to do. He didn't take a ticket or head for a counter. Instead, he stopped right in the center of the bank, pulled a pistol out of his jacket, and pointed it at the ceiling. I froze. "Everybody on the ground," he shouted, his voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. For a second, no one moved. It was as if time itself had stopped. The woman at the counter dropped her pen, the older couple turned in slow motion, and then reality kicked in. People screamed, diving to the floor, and I found myself ducking down behind one of the lounge chairs near the entrance. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. "Now, don't make me say it again," he barked, waving the gun around. From my spot on the floor, I had a clear view of him. He didn't look nervous. He wasn't shaking. He was cold, like he'd done this before. He walked calmly toward the tellers, his gun never wavering. "Empty the drawers." "Now," he said, nodding toward the two tellers frozen behind the glass. One of them, a young woman, started sobbing, but the other teller, a man older, maybe in his 50s, kept his composure. His hands shook as he opened the cash drawer and began to stuff the money into a plastic bag the robber had tossed at him. "Faster," the man ordered, his voice low but dangerous. I pressed myself against the floor, my mind racing. This wasn't happening. It felt unreal, like something out of a movie. But the gun in his hand and the terrified faces around me told me otherwise. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe. And then, the door chimed again. I turned my head, just enough to see another man enter the bank. This one was bigger, broader, wearing a mask and holding a shotgun. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a lone guy looking for a quick score. This was a planned robbery. The second man stalked toward the entrance, locking the door behind him. No one was getting in or out. "Everyone stays down, and no one gets hurt," the second guy growled, his voice deep and menacing. I could hear the older couple near me whispering, the woman barely able to hold back her sobs. I felt the weight of the situation crushing me. I didn't have my phone, and even if I did, there was no way I could make a call without being seen. The first guy, still holding the pistol, barked at the tellers again. "Hurry up." I'm not asking twice. The older teller was moving as fast as he could, stuffing wads of cash into the bag, while the younger teller could barely hold it together, her hands trembling so badly she dropped several bills onto the floor. I was terrified that one of them would snap, that the robbers would lose their cool. It felt like the whole room was balancing on the edge of a knife, and all it would take was one wrong move for things to spiral out of control. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. The man in the suit who'd been arguing with the clerk earlier was inching his hand toward his jacket. I realized, with horror, that he had a gun. "Don't do it," I muttered under my breath, praying he'd stop. But he didn't. He kept reaching, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on the second man near the entrance. My throat went dry. This was about to get very bad. The moment seemed to stretch forever. And then, without warning, the man in the suit made his move. He whipped the gun from his jacket and fired at the robber near the door. Bang! The shot echoed through the bank, deafening in the small space. The second robber stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, but he wasn't down. He fired back, shotgun roaring. The man in the suit dove behind a counter just as the blast tore through the glass. Chaos erupted. People screamed, the robbers shouting orders, the gunman behind the counter firing another shot. The first robber spun toward the shooter, his face twisted in rage, and started firing wildly in his direction. Pop, pop, pop. Glass shattered. The sound of gunfire was deafening, each shot ringing in my ears as I pressed myself harder against the floor. I could hear the older couple crying, feel the tension in the air as bullets whizzed past. Every part of me screamed to stay still, stay down. But something deep inside me, a primal instinct, told me to run. I glanced toward the back of the bank, where the staff-only door stood ajar. If I could make it there, maybe I could find an exit, get outside, call for help. My heart hammered in my chest as I made the decision. With the gunman distracted, I crawled toward the door, trying to move as quietly as possible. Each second felt like an hour. When I reached the door, I stood up just enough to push it open and slipped inside. The back hallway was empty, and I ran, sprinting toward what I hoped was a back exit. My breath was ragged, my pulse racing. I didn't know if they'd seen me, and I wasn't about to stop and find out. I reached the back door and shoved it open, bursting into the alley behind the bank. For a second, I just stood there, gulping down cold air, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I dialed 911. The police arrived in minutes, swarming the bank with lights and sirens. They got the robbers, both of them. The man in the suit, he was hit but alive. Barely. It was over. But as I stood there in that alley, watching the chaos unfold from the safety of the parking lot, I realized something that chilled me to my core. That 5-minute trip to the bank, it almost became the last thing I ever did. Story 2. The Wrong Turn. I've always enjoyed driving late at night. There's something calming about the empty roads, the hum of the engine, the way the world seems quieter. But one night, that sense of peace shattered into something I'll never forget. It was a Friday, and I was driving back home from a friend's house, taking the back roads to avoid traffic. The route was familiar, winding through farmlands and stretches of dense forest. I'd done it 100 times before, so when I saw the Dieter sign pointing left, I didn't think twice. The main road was under construction, so I followed the narrow path, assuming it would reconnect soon enough. The road got narrower, rougher, and the further I drove, the fewer signs of civilization I saw. No houses, no streetlights, just trees on either side, stretching into the black night. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness. After a while, I started feeling uneasy. I should have hit another road by now, but the Dieter kept winding deeper into the woods. I thought about turning around, but the road was so narrow, I wasn't sure I could do it without hitting something. So, I kept driving, telling myself I'd find the main road soon. About 20 minutes in, I saw it. A house. It was old, run down, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. But what caught my attention was the car. A beat-up sedan, parked haphazardly in the overgrown yard, its headlights shining directly into the trees, like someone had just pulled up in a hurry. I slowed down instinctively, but as I passed, something felt off. There was no one in the car, and the door was hanging open, as if the driver had abandoned it in a rush. My stomach knotted. I sped up, hoping to put as much distance between me and that house as possible. A few miles later, the road became rougher, potholes, branches strewn across the gravel. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I was losing patience and starting to panic. Where the hell was this road leading me? Then I saw another car. This one was in the middle of the road, headlights off, just sitting there, blocking my path. My heart skipped a beat. I slowed to a stop about 20 feet from it, my fingers trembling as I flicked on my high beams. The car looked old, rusted, like it had been sitting there for years, but the tires were fresh, and the windshield wasn't caked in dirt like the rest of it. My gut screamed at me to turn around. Something was wrong. I threw my car in reverse, but before I could back up more than a few feet, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. 2 figures, stepping out from the trees behind me. Panic surged through me. They weren't walking. They were running. I slammed the car into drive, my heart pounding in my throat. My tires squealed as I veered around the abandoned car, the narrow road barely wide enough to pass without hitting the trees. But I didn't care anymore. I just needed to get out of there. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures were still there, standing in the middle of the road, watching me, unmoving. I couldn't make out their faces, just their silhouettes, dark against the glow of my taillights. My pulse was racing. Who the hell were they? Why were they standing out there in the middle of nowhere? Every instinct in my body screamed that they weren't just lost hikers or people needing help. I kept driving, trying to calm myself down, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe the car had just broken down. Maybe they were just heading back to town. But then I saw it, a pair of headlights coming fast from behind. I glanced in the mirror. It wasn't the old car. It was something newer, bigger, and it was speeding up, closing the distance between us far too quickly. Fear exploded in my chest. I floored the gas, my car struggling on the rough road, but the other vehicle was gaining on me. The headlights filled my rearview mirror, blinding me, and I could hear the roar of their engine getting louder. They were close, too close. Then, without warning, they swerved to the side, trying to ram me off the road. My car jolted as they clipped the rear bumper, sending me skidding toward the edge of the road. I fought to keep control, my heart hammering in my chest. My tires screeched as I fishtailed, but I managed to straighten out, speeding forward as fast as the old road would allow. But they weren't letting up. Another hit, harder this time. My car lurched, the tires barely gripping the dirt as I swerved dangerously close to the trees. The headlights behind me were blinding now, flooding my car with light. They weren't trying to pass me. They were trying to run me off the road. I was running out of options. My heart was racing, my mind scrambling for a plan. I didn't have much time before they'd force me into the trees. Then I saw it, a narrow path veering off to the right, barely visible in the dark. Without thinking, I yanked the steering wheel, taking the sharp turn at full speed. My tires screamed as I skidded onto the dirt path, branches scraping the side of my car. I could hear the other vehicle slam on its brakes behind me, tires squealing as they tried to follow. But they didn't make it. The path was too narrow for them. I heard a crash behind me, the sickening crunch of metal and wood splintering as their car slammed into the trees. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept driving, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The road twisted and turned, and I had no idea where it was leading, but I didn't care. As long as I kept moving, I was alive. Eventually, the path opened up onto a paved road. The relief was overwhelming. I drove for another hour, not stopping, not looking back, until I reached a gas station just outside of town. I stumbled out of the car, shaking, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I told the attendant what happened, but they just stared at me, wide-eyed. They'd never heard of a detour on the road I'd taken. There was no construction, no reason for it to be closed. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted, but I never drove those back roads again. Some places are better left unexplored, and some turns you should never take. Story 3. The Stranger in the Woods. I used to live in a small, rural town, deep in the heart of nowhere. My house was tucked away from the main road, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was perfect for someone like me, who craved solitude, until one night I learned that isolation comes with its own dangers. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard it. A knock soft and slow. I was groggy, unsure if it was part of a dream or real. Then it came again, 3 knocks, deliberate. I jolted up in bed, my heart already racing. Nobody ever came out here, and certainly not in the dead of night. The only people who even knew where I lived were my closest friends, and they would never show up unannounced at this hour. I listened, holding my breath, and then I heard it, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside my door. I slid out of bed, grabbed my phone, and crept toward the front window. Peeking through the curtains, I scanned the porch. There was nothing. No car, no movement, just the eerie silence of the woods. But then I heard it again. Bang, bang, bang. Someone was knocking, harder this time. I felt my stomach twist in knots. My first instinct was to ignore it, let whoever it was assume I wasn't home. But then a voice rang out from the other side of the door, muffled but clear. Hey, I need help. My car broke down. My grip tightened around my phone. My gut told me something was off. There was no way anyone would be out here without a reason. The nearest highway was miles away, and the kind of breakdown that would force someone to walk all the way to my house didn't make sense. I stayed silent, hoping he'd give up and leave, but then I heard him again. The voice was more urgent this time, more aggressive. Come on, man. I need to use your phone. And then footsteps. Running. My heart dropped as I heard them move from the front porch around the side of the house. I crept to the back window, and that's when I saw him, a dark figure moving through the trees, weaving in and out of the shadows. And he wasn't alone. Another man followed closely behind. I could feel panic rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I ran to the gun safe in my closet and grabbed my shotgun. My hands shook as I loaded it, but the cold metal in my grip steadied my nerves just a little. I locked every door and window I could reach, praying they were secure enough to keep them out. Then I heard the first one speak again, closer this time. You're making this harder than it has to be. Just let us in. They were toying with me now, testing me. The doorknob rattled from the other side, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The back door wasn't as strong as the front. If they really wanted to, they could kick it in easily. Then I heard the worst sound imaginable. Crack. They had started breaking the glass on the back door. I took a deep breath, trying to think. There was no way out. My truck was parked out front, but if I made a run for it, they'd see me. I was trapped in my own home, armed but terrified. I had one option, and it wasn't pretty. I crept back toward the kitchen, where the noise was coming from. Through the crack in the door, I saw one of them trying to reach inside through the broken window, his hand searching for the lock. Without thinking, I raised the shotgun and pointed it directly at the door. Get the hell away from my house, I shouted, my voice shaking. For a split second, everything stopped. The man froze, his hand still on the door. Then, like a switch flipped, everything went into chaos. He yelled something I couldn't make out, and suddenly there were two loud pops, gunshots. I ducked instinctively, feeling the bullets rip through the wood paneling near me. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger, and the shotgun roared to life, blowing a hole through the door where the man had been. He screamed and stumbled backward, disappearing from sight. But it wasn't over. The second guy had circled around to the front of the house, and I heard him shouting something to his partner. I could hear them scrambling, probably rethinking their plan now that they knew I wasn't going down easy. I took cover behind the kitchen counter, peeking just over the edge, when I heard more footsteps, faster, heavier this time. The front door rattled violently, and I knew they were going to make one last push. My pulse was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reloaded the shotgun, bracing myself for whatever came next. Sure enough, a deafening crash came from the front of the house as they tried to kick the door in. I fired a warning shot through the door, the blast echoing through the small space. It must have hit close enough because I heard one of them scream out, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. But I wasn't done. I ran to the window and saw them stumbling through the yard, trying to make a run for it back into the woods. I fired one more shot into the air, not aiming to hit them, but just to make sure they knew they'd picked the wrong house. When everything finally went silent, I stood there, breathing hard, the shotgun still in my hands. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I listened for any sign of movement, but all I could hear were the sounds of the woods. Birds, crickets, the wind in the trees. They were gone. For now. If you want to hear more stories like this, please like and subscribe. Also, check out my other videos.